Everyone for coming out tonight. We would like to give a special thanks to Justin Outling and Nancy Vaughn for coming to our side of town and speaking to our community. We really do appreciate that. Can we give them a hand for coming out? Let's bring my brother CJ Brinson from the Movement Consulting Firm. Good evening. Come on, y'all can do better than that. Good evening. Good to be here this evening with all of you. As Brother Gene has said, I am CJ Brinson, just a concerned citizen within our community. We've been working closely over here for quite some time now. And the whole piece about having these forums, and particularly this forum in the community, is to make sure that those who may not typically be engaged, they get an opportunity to involve themselves in political education, to become informed about what is happening within our community, especially as it pertains to our mayoral race. So we just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm sure that the candidates are going to do a really good job. They're going to do a great job of answering questions. You all are going to have the opportunity as well to ask questions. This is a forum. I want to set some decorum. This is a forum. This typically has not been the Greensboro way to do a debate. So we do a forum and give each person that opportunity to just allow us to hear from them. So we're really excited and just want to say thank you for coming out again. Thank you. And now we're going to get right into things, and I'm going to introduce Ms. Drashanta Brinson. She will be our moderator this evening. She has done such a great job in our previous forums, and so we decided that we got to continue to make this thing a success, and we asked her to come out and to moderate for us again. So without further ado, would you all give Drashanta Brinson a round of applause?
Hello. We meet again. Thank you for having me. As CJ said, I'm Drashanta Brinson. I will be the moderator for this forum today. I don't take this lightly. Thank you, Justin Outling and Mayor Vaughan, for trusting me with this process. Thank you, community, for trusting me with this process. It's Prestige Barber College and the Movement Consulting Firm. I do not take this lightly. My job is simply to move this process along. That means I'll be managing time. I'll be keeping us on task. And I will be doing anything that is going to help us to get these questions answered as directly as possible. I might ask you to clarify any jargon or any terminology that may not be in layman's terms. So don't be surprised if I do that. And just moving along, I'm going to set some ground rules because I have to. So we're going to adhere to time. And speaking of time, you're going to have 3 minutes to answer each question. Both of you will have the opportunity. Brother David here is very important to me because he is keeping the time with me. And when you hear his buzzer go off, I would ask that you don't have to stop, but complete your sentence so we can move along. I appreciate your respect and your cooperation in advance. Also, we're just asking that everyone be respectful. We know there's passion, there's hurt, there is all kinds of things, but we ask you just be respectful so that we can have a productive discussion and forum. We can get the answers that we need. You can give the answers that you need. I think that's pretty simple, and I think we can do that. And if I have to redirect or remind you of any of these ground rules, I don't mind doing so. All right. Okay, so we can get right into it if everybody is ready. Okay, all right. First question, quite simple. Mr. Allen, you can start first. It's just tell us about yourself and give us an introduction into who you are.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Outling. I'm a Greensboro City Council person representing District 3, as well as a candidate for mayor. Greensboro is at the foundation of who I am as a person in every significant way. I met my wife, Cora, as a freshman at UNC Greensboro. Our 2 kids, Clark and Clara, attended elementary school at Jones Elementary. In addition to being a member of Greensboro City Council, I practice law here in the city. I am really running for mayor to close and help our community close 2 important gaps. One that's the gap between Greensboro and other large cities in North Carolina, where we've seen household wages, the money into your home that helps you maintain, lag behind our peers in ways that are really devastating for our community. Also, we've seen violent crime really skyrocket and be off the charts for the past many years. By every single metric, whether it be looking at data or obviously what it's done to our community in terms of loss of human life and really destroying the fabrics of our community. I'm also running for mayor to help close the gap between East Greensboro and West Greensboro. I don't have to tell anyone here what East Greensboro has looked like for decades. And quite frankly, the status quo and doing things how it's been done for the past several decades obviously is not working. And so it's moving beyond symbolism and talk and actually doing the hard, proactive work to address things like crime and make sure that we have a transportation system that allows Greensboro residents to benefit from job opportunities that hopefully will come to our region being outside of Greensboro. So I look forward to discussing more particulars with you, more about my background, but that's who I am, Justin Outling.
Thank you, Councilman Outling. Mayor Vaughn.
Good evening. I'm Greensboro Mayor Nancy Vaughn, and I am running for my 4th term. I think being a mayor of Greensboro is the best job in the city. It is something when I wake up every morning, I'm invigorated because I know that I can make a change. This is where I chose to live my life. I have 4 children. I have 2 sons, John and Michael, who went through the public school system. And I have my daughter, Catherine, who is sitting here with me this evening. Living in the city of Greensboro, I am of the city of Greensboro. I know, Jean, you welcomed us over to the east side of town, but I am no stranger to the east side of town. Just last week, we were across the street for the Second Harvest Food Bank anniversary. And when I look at that shopping center, I know that I played a pivotal role in making sure that that shopping center was remodeled. I don't know how many of you remember what it looked like before. It was all boarded up except for the Dollar General. The parking lot was a pitted pothole mess. But when you drive over there now, it truly is a really good mall. It has services that are important to people in East Greensboro. And I know that that was something that I helped achieve. Jean, I've been here at the Barber College a couple of times. I was here when you did the COVID vaccinations. I'm not just coming to East Greensboro because this is an election year. I have been coming to East Greensboro for many, many years before I ran for mayor, because I know how important it is that we all succeed. You know, talk about lagging behind our peers. I'm going to get a little wonky right now, but in the 2000s, the Triad lost more jobs than the net state. We came from behind. We are now having incredible job opportunities that we have made sure will come to the residents of Greensboro. We have looked at transportation, how we're going to get people to the Greensboro Randolph megasite, how we're going to get people to Publix, how we're going to get people out to the airport. Those jobs by themselves are important, but for every single job that they create, there are another 5 spin-off jobs. We know that our peers are looking at us saying, oh my gosh, what is going on in Greensboro? I hear that when I talk to legislators, that the epicenter of the state of North Carolina has moved to Greensboro. And that didn't happen overnight. I'll tell you more about that later.
Thank you. Nancy, I want to give you a chance to catch your breath because the next question is going to be to you, okay? And Councilman Outling, you'll have a chance to answer it well, but I'm trying to, okay? All right. Describe for us your vision for the city of Greensboro should you be elected or re-elected as the mayor of this great city.
So one of the most important things that we can do is that we can raise our per capita income. We know that if more people have money in their pocket, that they have more options. They can rent better units, they can buy better houses, they can feed their families, they can get around easier. So my goal is to make sure that we can raise the wages within the city. As I said earlier, it didn't happen overnight. These really big job announcements that we had have been in the planning for years. I was on the recruitment team that brought these companies here. And so as we were talking to them, they needed to know that we had the workforce that would be able to support their multi-million dollar investment. And one of the things that we came up with through the state is that there would be job training on these sites at no cost to the individual, that will work with Boom and will work with Toyota. They have very special qualifications that they need. We are going to go out to our community colleges and hire professors that can teach specifically to those jobs. We talked about transportation, another thing that those employers wanted to know. Besides, will we upskill our workers? Could our workers actually get there? And we have plans in place for shuttle services, park and rides, crosstown routes, so that we know not only will our workforce be skilled, but that they will be able to get there. And again, for all of those jobs, there is spin-off. But the biggest problem, we do have two big problems, public safety and housing. And over the last couple of months, we have approved over 4,000 housing units. I know that we have to work with nonprofits to make sure that we can build quicker for affordable housing throughout the entire city, not just put the burden in one particular area, and for people who can have first-time home buying opportunities. This is something that I supported very strongly in our last bond, and why I know we need to have another bond. Right now, we have a $10,000 fully forgivable down payment assistance. Looking at the real estate market, I know that 10,000 isn't enough, that we're going to have to raise that to 15,000. And we're also going to have to raise the amount of money that people can make to qualify for that down payment assistance. I want to make sure that our city workers, our county workers, our teachers, that they can afford to live here. So those are the plans that I have, but not only are they plans, I've already put that in motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think those comments are a perfect reflection of the reality of Greensboro. That we know that it's really a tale of two entirely different cities. To talk about public safety, to talk about jobs in a way that would lead a person to believe that everyone has a job and everyone has a home or is on a pathway to have a home. That's not where Greensboro is right now, especially in the gap between East Greensboro and West Greensboro. And so my vision for the city of Greensboro, Nancy used the word wonky, it's a little bit wonky, but it's that we elevate substance over symbols, that we do the right things, not simply say the right things. And for me, I have a very direct style. It's informed by my life experience, because for me, it's not a game, it's not politics. I'm from a working class family. My father was a bus driver. Before then, he was a garbage man. I have lost family to the criminal justice system. I have a good high school classmate that is doing 50 years in federal prison. So for me, it's about what are we actually doing to make sure that our community is more fair or more safe, as opposed to just merely saying those things. That means doing things that require bold action, like having a youth jobs guarantee for at-risk youth. Not a summer internship program for everyone in our city, but a jobs guarantee for at-risk youth to help keep them off the streets during the summer and help give them job skills and greater opportunity. It means actual focused and strategic investment in East Greensboro, recognizing that that is a place that needs the attention. That is the area in which we need the most improvement. And we need it now in the same ways we've needed it over the course of the past several decades. It also includes not saying that we're looking at things, but actually doing the things. Reference was made to job losses in our community. In the early 2000s, we lost over 12,000 jobs. And so while there have been good announcements about jobs coming to Randolph County, which is outside of Greensboro, while there have been great announcements about jobs to come in many years in the future, hopefully at Vaughan at the airport, even if Greensboro got every single one of those jobs, which it will not, and they're outside the city, you're talking about only making up a third of the total jobs that were lost. And so for me, my vision is symbolism over substance, real planning, real prioritization. That means not acting as if our problems are so simple with transportation that we can have a simple shuttle bus. It means that we actually make investments in public transportation, making sure that the routes take Greensboro residents out to jobs at Boone. It also means making sure that we have job training, not out there in a few years when the job opportunities are gone, but making sure that we have people that have training now so that when the jobs do come, they benefit Greensboro inside the city, not just Randolph County.
Thank you. All right, moving on to our next question. Councilman Outling, this question is going to be for you, okay? Also for you, Mayor Vaughan, but it has been said that both of you have similar governing styles. Could you explain if you agree or disagree with that opinion, and please let us know why?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree that we have similar governing styles. My approach is one that is very open and collaborative. And my decisions are based really on the merits and what's best. I do things like proactively solicit feedback and information from community members. Even well before any election, I've had monthly meetings with any and everyone in the community to discuss matters that come before the city council before the city council actually votes on those things. A series called Java with Justin that I've now been doing for approximately 4 years. My decision-making process is really guided by information and reasoning and not politics. And even when I may have certain assumptions about what the right answer is, I leave myself open to more information making a change. Like several years ago when activists came to the city with a policy proposal called written consent. Essentially a policy that has been shown in other communities to reduce the disparities or the differences in the number of times white persons are stopped by the police and search versus black persons. And I will tell you where I started was not in a place where I was supportive of that policy. But as activists explained why it was a good policy, they explained why it didn't undermine public safety. It was something that I not only supported, even when it wasn't politically good or expedient for me to do so, and I also got on television and used my political capital to help advance it. That's in a sharp contrast to the style of the ban, quite frankly, where we've seen a reversal in position on can't wait. We've seen a reversal in position on written consent after there's been pressure. We see reversal in a position when our community's largest slumlords, the Gavin family, they had homes in which young Black children died. And to great fanfare, respectfully, the incumbent mayor got on the news, had a press conference saying that we're going to sue them and we're fed up, but then swiftly, essentially absolve and get rid of over $500,000 in fines that they owed through a settlement with the city. That's something that I objected to. And I also was open and listening to others and actually informing that decision. So respectfully, the approach is very different. It's borne out by actual votes. It's borne out by actual positions. It's borne out by actual interactions with activists and other community members. And I think that's what we need more of in our community to advance. Because the thing in politics, the easiest thing to do is to do absolutely nothing and maintain the status quo. I don't do that. And I'm open with people even when it's not politically expedient for me. And for example, I speak on police issues, even when we're involved in lawsuits, because that's the way our government should be. It should be open. It should be driven by the actual merits.
Thank you.
So I believe in campaigning on telling people why they should vote for me on the things that I've done. But I know that when you're running against an incumbent, you have to say how bad things are, or how bad the incumbent is, or why would you vote for them? So I want to say that our positions on how we work with council are completely different. And I put out a challenge twice now for you to talk to people you know on city council, your district rep, your at-large, the mayor, and you ask them who they can collaborate with. You ask them when they want to get something through, who they come to and who helps them. I know that when there is an issue I want to get through, that I know I've got to count to 5. Well, my opponent has said that as mayor, I am in a unique position that only I can bring things forward. But you know, that totally isn't true. And it actually shows it's not true by some of the words he has said, where he said, I put this forward, or I put that forward. There are 9 of us. We all have 1 vote. And I know that I can get people to get together and pass things. I want to say, first of all, I had no reversal of position when it came to written consent. I voted to put it on the agenda so that we could settle it once and for all. I brought forward informed video consent, and 4 of my other colleagues went along with it. Because 2 years from now, and a case is coming before for a judge, whatever, they look at a piece of paper with a signature on it, or they go back to the video and they make sure that the police officer has explained to them exactly what their rights are. A DA and the judges can look at that video and see if in fact the person understood what the officer was saying. Was there a language barrier? What exactly went on? So I passed something called informed video consent. And a lot of the cities that were pointed to who have written consent started written consent before there were body-worn cameras. I worked with the police department to make sure that they would preserve the body-worn cameras for over 3 years, to make sure that if somebody who wasn't charged in a crime, because that video has to be retained indefinitely, but if somebody feels that they were mistreated, that they can go back and look at the video. I'd rather go back and look at a video than look at a piece of paper.
Thank you, Mayor Vaughn. And to be clear, you both disagree that your governing style. Just for clarity. All right, Mayor Vaughn, I'm going to ask you this next question, okay? Can you let us know how long your tenure in office has been? I think you've alluded to that. And during your tenure, can you name things specifically that you have worked on to move policy that addresses the plight of Black people in this city?
Absolutely. I am very pleased that I have been your mayor for 8 years and that I work with people within the community, whether it's on housing or public safety or job creation. What can we do as a city? We have come together and passed many things. One of them is Cure Violence. I was an early supporter of the Cure Violence program. I think that's very important. On Wednesdays, I walk with Mothers Standing Against Gun Violence to see what it is that they think we need here in the community. I brought forth our bonds last time because I wanted to make sure that we had affordable housing. And I heard the message that they didn't want affordable housing just clumped in East Greensboro. They didn't want all the affordable housing dumped in District 1 and District 2. We've done a good job of making sure that it is in other areas of the community, such as Mears Chapel in District 4 and Sedgefield in District 5. Items that I was able to vote on. Unfortunately, my opponent was not able to vote on those issues because he was conflicted and had to recuse himself. I don't come into a community and just assume what it is that people need. I learned a long time by going through REI that you have to meet people where they are, that we can bring ideas into a community and it can be not what the community wants, that they have different priorities, they have different needs, and they have different wants. So when I look at the budget, when we used to have budget meetings and you would be in District 4 and 5, they would be talking about libraries and parks and rec, and here in Districts 1 and 2, they're talking about streets and sidewalks. So I have worked with our transit agency to see what it is that we can do to make our transit system more navigatable. And we have looked at putting different routes. I am a very strong supporter of on the bonds, the Windsor-Chavis-Noco, which will be completely transformative to that particular area. It will be investing over $80 million in an area that has been underinvested. You know, a long time ago, I did a tour with Sandra Alexander. I don't know how many of you remember her. And we talked about the differences of East Greensboro and West Greensboro, that West Greensboro has banks and East Greensboro had check cashing places. I worked hard to make sure that you can't have those check cashing places in East Greensboro, that there are banks and other amenities that people in East Greensboro have. I don't want to drive across the train. Thank you.
I think something I would encourage people to listen to is, listen to situations in which people claim credit for everything and responsibility for nothing. Going to leadership style, that's not my style. It may be the style of others, but it's not the style and approach I take. I supported great projects in our community, many things that all of our community enjoys. But that doesn't mean that Justin Outling was responsible for creating those projects, when oftentimes those things would have happened regardless of whether or not I was on the city council. It's one thing to vote a certain way. It's another thing to lead and actually get results that otherwise would not happen, but for you being on the board or but for you being the mayor. And my record is full of things that I've done for all of our community, and especially to the benefit of East Greensboro. It's important to understand now, I'm a District 3 representative. So my job while I've been on the city council is to make sure that I am representing my district. But notwithstanding that fact, I have spent time in ways and led changes that benefited all of Greensboro, especially East Greensboro. Whether it's creating a good repair ordinance, revisions to help ensure that properties that are in blighted conditions for decades on end don't always have to be that way. And that as a city, we can make repairs directly to properties. And even banks recognize that we have those powers, and so that they can pressure bad property owners to make repairs or sell those properties. Something that has resulted in a lot more quality housing, even without the city spending a cent towards it. Even before the horrific murder of George Floyd, helped lead the city in creating a policy that prohibits racial profiling. And for me, it's not an academic discussion. I have been racially profiled. I know how dehumanizing that is. I know what that does to a person, a man, and how it erodes trust, and it's dehumanizing. And I led the city in those efforts, working and collaborating with council members, working and collaborating with community, and even working and collaborating with the then police chief. I've also been in the community throughout the community. My children go to Jones Elementary across the street from Hampton Homes. I know when they have to shut down that school because of violence in the community. And to talk about our city as though it is safe, when in May at 8 o'clock at night, there were over 40 shots fired in Hampton Homes, where kids are playing near a school, it's not good enough, and we have to do better. And we know what the status quo has gotten us. We know what we will get with more of the status quo. It's time for change.
Thank you very much. All right, our next question to you, Councilman Outling. Don't get a breath there. As we consider the recent murder of Joseph Lopez, what practices or policies will you put in place to lessen the chance of similar occurrences happening in the city of Greensboro?
So for those of you who may not know, Joseph Lopez was shot by a Greensboro police officer who has recently been indicted, which means charged with manslaughter. That's an unprecedented thing. I'm not aware of an officer being charged for manslaughter in our city's history. And across the country, it's the type of thing that doesn't really happen very often. The city released the body camera video of what happened, and it's really difficult to see. And I tell you, both as an attorney as well as a community member, I can't make heads or tails of the video. What I do know is leadership on the city council and the person who is the mayor, which is the presiding officer, which means that that position can unilaterally or by itself set the city's agenda, makes a difference. In other communities, they have done and adopted a set of reforms or policies to reduce the likelihood of police violence against community members called A Can't Wait. People will tell you we have done it here. We have not. You can go to A Can't Wait's website and see for yourself. And a demonstration of that is on the video in which Mr. Lopez was shot, the officer did not give a warning before he fired a shot. So in our community, where we have not adopted A Can't Wait, that's really not an issue here. But in Charlotte, which has adopted A Can't Wait, that's a policy that's required. That would be a violation of their city policy and could be a basis for that officer to be fired, regardless of whether or not he was indicted for manslaughter there. The same with Winston-Salem, the same with Durham. And so to your question, I would actually be proactive and forward-looking. Additionally, I would actually allow for there to be votes and follow through on promises, as was done by the incumbent mayor shortly after the death of George Floyd, in which she told the paper that she supported these reforms. She mentioned at a council meeting that she was pursuing codification of these reforms, neither of which have happened to date. And I know there will be a lot of kind of throwing things out there because oftentimes politicians don't depend on people to actually check the records. The Greensboro Police Department did not adopt A Can't Wait. For example, we do not have a requirement that a warning be provided before an officer shoots. We do not have what's called the continuum of force. That means, unlike in other cities, we don't require officers to use the least amount of force possible before using deadly force, as long as they have a reasonable belief that they're going to be harmed really bad, they can use lethal force. That's another thing we don't have in Greensboro. And so it's time to move beyond the cycle of statements, the cycle of speeches, the cycle of press releases. It's time to actually take the actions, even when it's not politically expedient to do so. I'm committed to doing so. I have a record that shows that I've done so, and I would do so in leading our city as its mayor.
Mayor Vaughan.
So I would like to ask for that folder, if you would bring it to me. There's a lot of talk about A Can't Wait and the fact that the city didn't adopt it. Well, I can tell you that that is not true. And if you go to the city's directives, you can see the A Can't Wait checklist. It's right there. You talked about the person, the officer who got fired because of the Joseph Lopez case and how unprecedented that was. Well, we do have a directive that requires to say that you are going to shoot. And he didn't do that, and he was fired. So I'm not exactly sure. Here is the A Can't Wait. And in addition to that, the police chief changed an additional 40 directives back in, let's see where it was, July 1st, 2021. The police chief and Nathaniel Davis, who is our assistant over public safety, wrote us all on what we were doing with A Can't Wait. And also note for context, the information on the Campaign Zero page is inaccurate, as it references information that was gathered before June of 2015. There is no reference related to more current updates. We have been attempting to make contact with the website, but for now have not been able to. This is something that we all got as a city council. It is completely wrong to sit up here and say that something wasn't done and that you can look at websites and see it wasn't done when we've actually had information that all of those directives were changed. They sent them to us in a number of different ways. And it is, if you go to the GPD website, it is right there on the front page. And it talks about all the directives that have been changed as a result of the George Floyd murder and others. I am glad that the police chief actually started looking at 8 Can't Wait before George Floyd. One of the things that he had instituted was that it was illegal to shoot at a moving vehicle. There has been a police officer who was discharged for shooting at a moving vehicle. Not only do we have these in place, they are holding police accountable, and there has been action. So I really resent when somebody sits here to say that we have done nothing, that our police department has done nothing, when you can tell just recently that that change made a huge difference when it came to the fact that that police officer was discharged.
Could I possibly respond?
You cannot rebut at this time. However, you will have more time later on
Much appreciated.
to state any closing and final things that you would like to say, okay?
That's fine.
All right, thank you. All right, moving along. Don't try to slide that in there. I'm about to ask you another question. Talk to us.
And I've got a lot I would like to. So.
Talk to us about your role in advancing MWBE. What things have you spearheaded to advance the recommendations made by Griffin and Strong? Can the minority community expect to receive a 10% to 15% of all city contracts? Can the minority community expect to receive 10 to 15% of all city contracts as recommended by Griffin and Strong? Go ahead.
Thank you. So there is a bill, House Bill 303, that we've been trying to get through for the last couple of years. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do it in the short session. And it is a small business enterprise fund. And it is something that Durham and Charlotte have had for a couple of years and that we've been advocating for. And what it does is it allows companies, especially our local companies, our local MWBEs, to go after jobs under 300,000 with companies that are small, that they're not bidding against the big guys, that this is something that will not only bring local businesses, but it'll bring local minority business forward. You know, we had an issue in our last city council meeting where we paid $1.7 million more, and the MWB subcontractors got $500,000. And I started thinking, what is it that we could do that would be different? We had to buy that $500,000 by spending an additional 1.2. I believe in growing wealth in our community. That is so important. But then I started thinking about, why can't we do something like carbon credits or offsets when people are disturbing natural areas? People are allowed to buy credits. I am going to bring to Griffin and Strong and ask them, how is it that when there is a differential, if there is a job where somebody can't find an MWBE that is available, that we can allow them to find work on different projects. It might be a private project that they have, but it will certainly broaden their look at what they can do to employ our MWBE contractors. Now, I was a little concerned the last time that we did our Griffin and Strong, we actually extended it to 27 counties. I want to see the people in Greensboro get the jobs. I'm not worried about all 27 counties. I would like to see us pull back and go back to the original 10 counties that we had. But more so than that, how can we make sure that the dollars are focused in our community? We don't necessarily want it to be for people in Winston-Salem and Durham and other communities. We want MWBE growth right here in our community.
Thank you. One of the things that, I came to understand as I had more schooling and read more was sometimes there's no substitute for actually reading. And so I encourage all of you, go to the sites that the mayor identified and read what it says. It's really easy to come up with a clever graphic that puts a check mark next to something, but the text not actually be a reform of ACAN law. And I want you to actually look at those policies and look for something that says you're required to warn before you shoot. I encourage you to look at the District Attorney Avery Crump's press release where she discusses why the officer was indicted. I encourage you to look at the city's press release, which says that the officer was fired because he was indicted, not because he violated the policy. Mr. Lopez died over 6 months ago. The officer was not fired from Greensboro Police until the indictment because of the indictment. We do not have a can't wait. Campaign Zero has checked it. They checked it after we made reforms, as evidenced by the fact that one of the reforms is actually noted on Campaign Zero's website. And so again, I would encourage you to actually look at the fact yourself, actually do the research. It'll take all of 5 minutes, and it'll clearly show where the facts are in this particular case. With regard to MWBE, minority and women businesses in our community, there's not nearly enough participation. Companies of color and women that are getting city contracts, let alone getting other contracts across our community. The reality is that these are difficult problems to address and solve because it involves complicated laws that don't allow you to do everything that you want to do as easily as you want to do it. And so I, as mayor, as I've done as a council person, understand the goal and understand different ways within the law to actually accomplish the goal. For example, I and another councilwoman created the first in state what's called a local preference policy, which gives local companies a leg up in city contracts, smaller city contracts. That's great because it's Greensboro companies. And I'll be a mayor for jobs in Greensboro as opposed to jobs in Randolph County. But it's also an MWBE issue because a disproportionate number of those who benefit from that policy are minority and women businesses, as evidenced by the fact that the original proposal was more aggressive and we had to compromise so that it could actually get passed. And don't you know, 6 months or so later, there was a Black company who was seeking a contract to clean the Coliseum. If it were the original policy that was proposed, that Black company would have gotten $1 million contract. And so I will use my ability to understand complex problems and get things done, just as I have as a district council person, but I'll do it as mayor with the community and the bully pulpit behind it.
Vaughan, I want to apologize if it seemed like there was a rebuttal in there. If you have,
Yeah, I didn't realize we get to pick our.
If you want to, answer in 30 seconds, just to make sure that we on equal playing field here, okay?
No, I'm going to pass. I'll try to clean it up at the end because there's quite a few to rebut. I don't know I can do it in 30 seconds.
Okay. You'll have more time to, and so were you, Councilman Outling, to rebut or any claims that Mayor Vaughan makes. Okay. All right. Our last question. The question is, the city has done a lot of work to look at the connections between poverty and crime in our community and looking at violence as a public health crisis. With that being said, what are your plans to address violent homicides in our community? And that question is to be answered by you, Mr. Outling, first, and then Mayor Vaughan. Thank you.
To address violent crime in our community, and to reduce violent crime in our community, we need prevention and intervention. Prevention is doing the proactive, difficult things to address the root causes of crime, like poverty. We have nearly a third of Guilford County school students who live in poverty. Many of my children's classmates, the only meal that they are getting in a day is at school. So as a city, we have to work harder on those things. That means that there are no spare dollars for giveaways and handouts for Bourbon Bowl. Where simply because they're well connected, they get $80,000 without providing a single job, without providing any capital investment. It means that there isn't money that we just have sitting around for Cadillac Garage. The same exact situation. It means that we're investing those resources to address the root causes of crime. That means that we're doing things like having a youth jobs guarantee for at-risk youth. It means that we're actually fixing our transportation system and not acting as if it's such a simple issue as all we need to do is run a shuttle out to Randolph County when jobs get here in several years. No, it doesn't work that way. It means that we have to have bus rapid transit. It means that we actually have to have dedicated lines. It means that we must break the cycle of every single year talking about we have to move from a hub and spoke system to a system where we have crosstown routes. Yeah, that's right, but you actually have to do the difficult thing and have that reflected in a budget. And so that's what I will help and work with our counseling community to do in terms of prevention. In terms of intervention, it means that our law enforcement community, they also need to have the resources to respond to crime. That means that we actually have to do things unlike which the incumbent mayor did. When the federal government gives us money for police equipment, yeah, we have to take it. You take the money so that they can have the equipment. So we're not pulling it from other things and other programs. It also means that, yeah, we have to be serious about programs like Cure Violence. Everyone during election season is going to tell you that Cure Violence is great. But where was the meeting to determine whether or not we have more Cure Violence in other areas? And I will tell you, Cure Violence isn't popular in the district I represent. But when you look at the data, and that's how I make my decision making, it's been really, really effective in the areas in which it exists. So it's as mayor actually having the work sessions, which the mayor schedules, having the meetings to do the hard work of analyzing, can we scale this? Can we do it in more communities? Because we need to have safety for all of Greensboro, not just certain neighborhoods.
Thank you.
So the first thing I want to address, because it's been brought up a couple of times, is this grant that we turned down. It is a JAG grant, and it is split between the city of Greensboro, High Point, and Guilford County Sheriff's Department. And it came before us, and for the very first time in history, it said, if you accept this JAG grant, you have to agree to work with ICE. And there were a number of us on council who work with our immigrant and refugee community, and we did not want to put them at risk. Since that time, that language has been removed from the JAG grant. I know that our officers don't act as ICE. I don't know what the Sheriff's Department does. I don't know what the Sheriff's Department does once they get to the jail. But to me, what was most important was to make sure that our immigrants and refugees were not put at risk for a couple of bucks. So I voted against it. We have voted for subsequent ones, but that was because the federal government removed the language about the police department having to coordinate with ICE. You know, we talk about poverty, and I know that poverty is a big issue that we have. So a few years ago, we had an opportunity to do $15 an hour for our workers. You know, our workers, they work really hard. They are out in the cold, they're out in the heat, they're fixing water lines, they are picking up our trash all the time. They have worked 100% through COVID. I voted for the $15 an hour minimum. My opponent didn't. When we talk about poverty, I want to make sure that our employees are not living in poverty, that we can do the best that we can to raise their standard of living. My hope was that other governments like the school board and the county commissioners and High Point and others would follow our lead. But make no mistake, we were one of the very first to support the $15 an hour minimum wage. There will be more money for cure violence. In working with the county and speaking to the county chair, he said that there is another $250,000 in the county budget to support cure violence. We are still doing our full allotment at 500. And he wanted to make sure that if he gave 250, we weren't going to cut our budget by 250. So they now have a budget of 750,000. And I want to say, I think they've, sorry.
You can finish your statement.
No, I respect the timer.
All right. We are going to move on to the portion of this program that is going to let our community members ask questions. In doing so, we are going to be respectful of one another. Okay? I think that each person, we're going to allot a certain amount of time, but you can ask one question. Don't make a statement, ask a question. Okay? Thank you. You will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. If you want to present it to one of the candidates in particular, you can do that. But also, if the other candidate would like to respond in 2 minutes to that same question, you can choose to do so or not. Okay? All right. Here we go.
So a couple things before we get started. Please try to keep your question within 1 minute, please. I will come around with the mic. I will hold the mic so that you can speak. And so that I can pull it back if I need to. We will do 2 questions from the audience here, then we will go to a Zoom question, then we'll come back and do 2 questions here, and then we'll go back to Zoom. Okay? Anyone like to? If they're comfortable doing so. All right. Who do we got?
Lisa McMillan, my question is, you are an incumbent. Why hasn't there been more discussions around the infrastructure for transportation? Because number one, Route 15 running on an hourly schedule where there's a housing project and Walmart and social service is unacceptable in 2022. But if, as mayor, you don't make it a part of what's important on the agenda, the services don't get to the people who actually could be benefiting and not spending all of their life waiting or transit or out in the sun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the question. We have been looking at transit and how we can improve our routes. And we look at it by how many people are actually using those routes. And if we can change them, if we can do them with more frequency. And actually transportation is something that we discuss on a fairly regular basis. I go to some of the transportation meetings. I think it is important to hear from the riders what the issues were. When the Guilford County school system asked the city of Greensboro to help them with their bus transportation, we immediately stepped up. But I also wanted to make sure that it was doable. So I started taking the bus. I downloaded the app on my phone. I went on to the city's website and I made sure that it was navigable. That's a word. From some areas of town, it is quicker. From others, we are going to have to make some changes. But transportation absolutely is a priority. We subsidize transportation by almost $600 million. when you look at things that are important in our budget, you will see the investment that is made in transportation.
Is that what you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. I actually agree with the mayor on this. We look and look and look and look at transportation. What we don't do is actually act and actually do the things necessary to improve our public transportation system. We've discussed the need for our community to have crosstown routes. It's been discussed for the past decade. It's not reflected in the budget. And more significantly, even in extraordinary years like this one, in which we received nearly $60 million from the federal government, and we don't be proactive and provide directions to staff, they come back with recommendations that hand out $5,000 to well-connected nonprofits, but have $0 in the initial recommendations for public transportation. And so respectfully, the public transportation system reflects decisions that were made. Just like when my father was a bus driver for nearly a quarter decade in Charlotte, their transportation reflected decisions made by their elected officials. That's the way that it works. It's also important to understand, if you don't have any experiences outside of an election year for the first time, riding public transportation, if you haven't, as my wife and I experienced when we were in college and didn't have a car for a period of time, trying to get from UNCG to Walmart and back and seeing how it takes you 2 hours, that informs your lack of a sense of urgency in terms of actually prioritizing those things. So in terms of my leadership and going to the question before, my vision, my agenda, it's very simple. Radical focus on jobs and economic development, focused on youth employment, focusing on public safety, taking the resources that are available and actually reading the language and understanding when language has been in there time immemorial for those particular types of contracts. It's also prioritizing public transportation, not just because my dad was a bus driver and I like my dad and have fond memories of my dad's career, but it's because the way that we move our community forward and make sure that the jobs in Randolph County benefit not just Randolph County, but people in Greensboro that need access to them for them to be a success.
Thank you. Next question.
My name is Rafael Daly. I see the moderator looking, but I'm gonna keep it short. I'm bad at this, but I just got a question for both of you. I actually work with at Rescue, and we try to work on prevention.
You said you work with?
At Rescue, but we try to work on prevention, so nothing actually happens. I actually got a kid here with me today who was in some trouble 2 years ago, trying to do the right thing, but he had a question from me last week. He said, how do I get better now that I'm home and a crack house is across the street and they dealing drugs over here? And then you put me in a summer camp with the probation officer way across town that I got to figure out how to get to. That's feeding me a hot dogs all day. So we actually get ready to leave at a grocery store and get some food for lunch. But what do you tell this child? How's it gonna get better?
Mayor Vaughn, you can go first.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your question. And I know how important it is that we want our children to be safe and we want them to have hope. Children without hope, it's a deadly thing because then they look for things in other areas. So when we got that $60 million of money from the federal government, which I would like to say that as chair of the Metro Mayor's Organization, I worked very hard to make sure that there was direct funding to cities. There hadn't been in the past in the ARP funds. One of the things that I first brought up was that we need to lift up organizations in our community, especially Black and brown organizations who have been doing the work all the time, but they don't qualify for United Way loans or they don't qualify for chamber loans, that we had an absolute once in a lifetime opportunity. I will tell you that I sat down and I called 30 organizations and encouraged them to apply for funding. Some of that funding is still pending. We also work with Piedmont Business Capital to give them 2.5 million so they could do smaller grants and loans. You know, when Mr. Outling talks about that we are giving money to well-connected nonprofits. The nonprofit that he has been alluding to is Sanctuary House, because they needed to put new windows in their building, a house that was built in 1902. If anybody knows Sanctuary House and the work that they do, you would know that the money that they asked for was desperately needed. I support putting money into organizations at the local level who have been working out of their trunks, who have been working off of their living room tables. You know, when I brought it up, Mr. Outling actually said that you can't put funding towards a particular race, that would be illegal.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I said it because it's right, and that's in fact the truth. And part of getting things done is actually understanding the ways that things work so that you can accomplish a task. And to be clear, Sanctuary House, other organizations do a good job in what they do. Heck, my mother runs an organization that does the same thing as Sanctuary House in Charlotte. I believe in its mission, but to suggest that for Sanctuary House, or quite frankly, most other organizations that were lucky enough to get a call from the mayor and encouraged to apply for these funds, that $5,000 to fix their windows is more important than public transportation. I think that reflects a lack of good prioritization, and I think it's a further reflection of the existence of the status quo and what you'll get with 4 more years if you elect the incumbent mayor. My approach is different. It's actually prioritizing the important things and focusing on those things to move our community forward. The same way that Durham, with an exceptional mayor, was able to move that community forward. Once the murder capital of North Carolina, once a community in which young persons did not want to go, stay, or live, and now it's knocking the socks off of Greensboro, having 4 times as much population growth. And quite frankly, with that growth, their community members paying significantly less in taxes for a lot more services. And so my approach is decidedly different. So what I'll say to you is the same thing that I'll say to the youth that you're working with. We can do better. And I hope you engage and encourage and pay attention to the decisions that people are making. We have an internship program effectively with the police department that city council members tell you that they love, but it's not focused on at-risk youth. We've heard from other council members about kids from Oak Ridge and effectively the suburbs outside of Greensboro getting those particular jobs. We also know that the city gave it a budget of 0 the other year. How are you going to say you prioritize something, you love it, with a budget of 0? And even more recently, the budget was $50,000, where you can't even hire a staff person on a complete city salary at $50,000. But we also see the gap widening between us and our peers, as we see Winston-Salem adopting the program that I have been describing for 2 years to help reduce violent crime in their community, working with at-risk youth. And so I would encourage you, others, those persons to make their voices be known, pay attention to the votes and positions that council members are taking, and vote on July 26th or early voting on July 7th, hopefully for me as mayor.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Sandra Isley, and it might seem like a lot of questions, but it comes down to one.
Okay.
I hear them talking at the game, but I want to know when they're going to stop running games. You usher the poor out here, but you do nothing about the poor. You build on top of the poor. When you going to stop doing that? I mean, what we have gotten from you all, we could have gotten with the Republican Party. Because all we have gotten under your leadership is that the richer have gotten richer and the poor has gotten poor. We need to see you all put your words to work and change our living arrangement. That's my question. You talk about what you're gonna do in the future. There is no future if you don't work on the present.
Amen. Amen.
So don't talk about the jobs in the future. Bring the jobs here today. Now tell me what you're gonna do differently tomorrow, not 10 years from now.
Okay, Mr. Outling, you want to start with that?
I
Do you need clarity on the question, or do you understand the question?
I understand. Ms. Isley, I agree with you completely, and that's why I'm running for mayor. Quite frankly, I likely could serve in my district council seat for a long, long time because that's the way that incumbency works. but I'm running for mayor because I'm frustrated at the lack of change and the non-existence of progress in our community. And while I have voted against things like giving well-developed, well-connected developers money at the expense of community, it quite frankly is not enough. And the opportunity to affect more change lies in the position as the presiding officer of the council, which means that in addition to 5 council members being able to put something on the agenda, the mayor can independently put something on the agenda, as well as the reality that the mayor's position gets the most attention. So that when our community needs change, if you have a visionary mayor that's focused on action, you can help move that change through that bully pulpit. So I would encourage you to go to my website, voteoutling.com. In contrast to others, there's an actual page that lists accomplishments and has actual citations. And you'll see a record there that reflects equity, fairness, and a real focus on jobs and public safety.
So to me, it's not important who gets the credit. It's important that we work together and make sure that something gets done. You know, Mr. Outling is talking about all the changes that he would make if he is mayor. These are all changes that he could have made, but he didn't. It has nothing to do if you represent a district or at large or at the mayor. Presiding officer means I read the agenda. I facilitate the meeting. It doesn't mean that I set the agenda. It doesn't mean that I am the only one who is allowed to add things to the agenda. Ms. Isley, I know that you are very frustrated about this. I read it on your Facebook page. I see it in your face. I saw you, I don't know, I guess it was last year when we were walking the neighborhoods. I know that we need to make more investment throughout our entire city, which is one reason why that Parks and Recreation program is so important. Ms. Isley, you've talked about how important it is to have good parks and recreation facilities in communities. Well, on our bond, there is an $80 million Parks and Recreation community building for East Greensboro. You know, this 500 job initiative is something that was born out of talking about public safety. The police chief and I were in a room with others of his staff, and we brought all of community leaders. We brought leaders in from neighborhoods, and we brought in business community. And we said, what can we do to affect an immediate change? And that is how the 500 Jobs Initiative was born. Quite frankly, I'm not sure what kids from Oak Ridge was there. I think that is an urban legend. I went to all of the job fairs and I could see the kids. I spoke to them, I spoke to their parents. They were from our city and primarily East Greensboro.
Thank you. We are moving on to our next question from our community.
30 seconds.
Now that's messed up, man. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna see, and you gonna cut the mic on me, Kenny? Okay, all right. I guess
You can talk loud, okay, come on.
I guess y'all can hear me, so and I do my best to lift my voice. We all know I'm quiet. So I came in here today because I wanted to get a deeper understanding as to why people voted the way that they voted, especially on policing. As a GC Jack member, we have barely made it on the agenda, nor are we invited. We ain't seen a case in about a year and a half. And what I'm hearing by saying we have 8 can't wait, when I know that is a lie, because I got an MBA and full receipts before we even do all of this, okay? It's like I'm sitting here, and while I listen, how do I say this language, Jesus? While I listen to all of this, I want to know, one, why did you change your vote, Nancy, after talking to Greensboro Rising, saying you would support it, and then going back and saying that you gotta have the body cam? The police department keeps body cam footage for like 3 years anyway. So that in effect was no real change to the policy. And you can shake your head, Nancy, but I helped write it.
And your one question is?
And drop your credentials on the fact while you come up here and say that.
What is your one question, Kay?
Why did you change your vote on written consent?
And why has the council been silent as PCRB members have called to say that the police department was not turning in cases, and your city manager, Chuck, who can slide in my DMs to talk junk because he got outed.
All right.
So I spoke to Tom Phillips. He reached out to me. He said there was trouble getting some cases before GC Jack, that you were waiting on body worn camera. I reached out to Letitia to see if we could get those expedited. Certainly you don't know what you don't know. At least Tom Phillips picks up the phone and calls me when he's having, I don't know what you talked to Justin about. I know that you support his campaign. As far as changing my vote, I did not change my vote. And I said that I voted to put it on the agenda because I thought it was important. It had been talked about and talked about and talked about. So it was a time that we were going to have to make a decision. I made a very hard decision. I think it was the right one. My council members went along with it. They were not holding body worn cameras. They were keeping them for 90 days. They are now, unless they were involved in charges, now they are keeping them for a minimum of 3 years. If a charge happens, they keep those body worn cameras indefinitely.
Yeah, Kay apparently does have credentials because she is right. I mean, as you would suspect, when there's body worn camera video, the police retain the video. A good example of this is what happened with Officer Lopez. And so there was a real ruse done at the city council because they didn't want to make it seem like they completely ignored written consent. So they passed something really symbolic so that, for example, during election time, they could say, oh, this is about how you document what happened on camera. No, written consent is about reducing disparities in stops, in searches based on race. And the data has shown that when you require that the request for consent be in writing, disparities dissipate. It wasn't me who came up with that. It was the activists who actually showed the data, including what happened in Durham on the subject. And the political reality of what happened was there was support for A Can't Wait to pass. And then the Police Officers Association publicly came out against the policy, and you saw several council members reverse their position. That's what happened. It wasn't the logic, because the logic was sound. And again, I'm transparent. I didn't start off supporting it. But the logic was sound, the law was sound, politics got in the way, as it often does.
Thank you. We have another question from our community.
Hi, good evening. So this question is for you, Mayor Vaughan, because you're the incumbent. So too often we see white progressive allyship in the form of charity or benevolence to Black and Brown communities. So in East Greensboro, District 1 and 2, which are predominantly Black or marginalized communities, outside of giving money from the budget and supporting through showing up or whatever else has come through budget, right? Every single term that you've been here, which I guess is 3 terms at this point. Outside of those acts of giving to charity or investing in community-based service organizations, what have you done that's substantive, that's changed and given us real equity in Districts 1 and 2? And what have you done to really give us access at the table and not just giving out charity to make yourself feel better or make it look like you're an ally to us? What's changed in 3 terms?
Thank you.
So I think it is important that I have actually spent time in East Greensboro and spoken to many neighborhood groups to find out exactly what it is that they need. Not necessarily what I think somebody needs, but to listen to what those issues are and how they think they could be fixed. And I've worked with that. Just for instance, 2 weeks ago, St. Phillips AME, they have a great community garden. I was out talking with Pastor Caldwell, and there was an issue with irrigation, that in order for them to get the farming done, they had to bring 1 hose from the church. So I immediately went and called Water Resources and spoke to our city manager. What can we do, not only for this community garden, but other community gardens as a city? How can we provide water? How can we make sure that all of these great gardens throughout the city, but especially in East Greensboro, can we make it easier? But these things that I come up with, I don't come into a community and say, you need this, you need that. I listen to what it is that they say they need, and then I become the facilitator to make it happen.
I'll tell you, every council person spends time in community. Especially since, I've gotten the opportunity to run for mayor and received even more invitations was the case before. I've spent time, not with a group, but just independently with one other person going door to door in much of East Greensboro, including in housing communities. But it's important to understand that will never be enough. You can't walk your way to structural change, to fairness and equity. What we need is actual action. So while it's terrific to provide a church a water hose, it will take us forever to provide all the water hoses we need in our community. That's why there has to be structural change with real vision. That's why there has to be prioritization that says no to Bourbon Bowl, yes to public transportation, moving buses from our community to Randolph County, so we don't have donut hole prosperity where the inner city of Greensboro is lacking in opportunity and wealth, while Randolph County, Forsyth, and other communities are swimming in assets. It takes more than simply walking. It takes actually doing. If walking was sufficient, our community would look very different than it does now.
All right, our next question. Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Thugai, Mayor. I'm an artist / entrepreneur. I have my own sauce. Actually, last year I was cooking at the festival and I gave you one.
Yep.
And yeah, yes you did. Yes, you did. It was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out the funding for like small businesses for like what I have going on with the sauce. Like I noticed there's not really much funding out here for that and help. So I would love like more information on that. Like how can I go about doing the funding? And I love to give both of y'all one. I got one for you and one for you.
And I got one.
That's
I got one last year.
This is
Yes.
new one. This is gluten free right here too.
So what,
Can I go up there?
You give me hers. She has one. I want
Okay.
hers.
So what I would encourage and what I would do with you is that when we, talked about the ARP funding, we did already have our application process, but the Piedmont Business Capital, are you familiar with them?
No, man.
So I'll be happy to connect you up. They look at very low interest loans or grants. The city is trying to make the money that we have given them into grants. And so that is something that you would apply, and you've got a great product and you know what you're doing, that I think you would have the opportunity to actually qualify for those grants. Our budget just closed. We just voted on it at our last meeting. So we have to look for other alternatives. Launch Lab is another great one at the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce, and I'd be happy to introduce you to Luann. She worked with somebody who literally does nuts and pretzels and things like that. And just last week, they were shown on QVC. Launch Lab works with people to bring them to the next level. And I'd be happy to make that connection with both of those organizations for you. Thank you.
Piedmont Business Capital, as Nancy said, is a great resource. But I'm going to be straight up with you as I am with everyone. We have adopted a budget. Still make your ask and make your request. The reality is, when the city wants to give out money, for example, to well-connected insiders, it doesn't say we don't have money because we already passed the budget. When Bourbon Bowl received $80,000 in violation of the city's policy for when it gives out money, and the city didn't get a single job in return or any additional capital investment in return, Bourbon Bowl wasn't told no because we've already adopted a budget. And so I suggest to you, still make your ask. The political reality is it's probably unlikely, but still make your ask because there are others in our community make their ask. And sometimes, at least when they're well connected, they get exactly what they're asking for. I would kind of expand on that because the status quo isn't good enough. Like, so we know we give money to Piedmont Business Capital. That's great. We should do that. We should do more of that, but we have to go further. So what I tell you is, in terms of a vision, it's the city focusing its economic development efforts on small businesses, meaning we use our resources to do things like provide incubator space and other space to help you grow your business at Nussbaum and elsewhere. While the Chamber of Commerce, they focus on going after big game, big, large employers where they have a special expertise like a Toyota, like a builder. So, congratulations on the company. I look forward to tasting it. Still put in your requested ask, still bring pressure, encourage people to give you money, even if the prospects of it are low. And look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you gonna, you don't think I'm old enough to hold? No, sir. No. I like to stand up. Councilman Out, this is question especially for you. We've had one encounter where we've had a part of a conversation. That was at a cluster meeting, which included the G58 Greensboro precinct that I was chair of. And I asked you what your position was on the Smith homicide. You said, and I quote, "I've seen the tapes and the police did nothing wrong." You call that conversation?
That's not the language I use, but it's very close.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, you can change, you can correct my words. But the question I have is, you have been talking about support, about police support, and I'm not sure exactly what the phrase you used, but to support law enforcement. What I'm concerned, and I'd like you to tell us, these folks and me, what does that mean in detail? Are you going to be accepting gifts of armored vehicles? Are you going? What do you mean when you say you want to improve the structure?
Improving the structure means you make decisions based on actual merit. If the police need more resources because their response times are scary, it takes them so long to get to people in our community, it's a real threat to their safety, they get more resources. If there ever becomes a day in which they already have enough resources, you move resources elsewhere. But I want to be really clear, because this goes to a question I was asked previously about style. I answer every question that's asked of me. I don't say I'm not going to talk about Marcus Deion Smith because we're in a lawsuit. And so while at the time when you asked the question of me, I probably was one of, or perhaps even the only council member that provided their perspective on it, I was honest and transparent with you in calling it like I saw it. And I said, I looked at the tape, there wasn't, from what I saw, although everyone can have their own opinion, and I respect everyone's opinion, there wasn't a violation of existing policy, of existing law. It's the council's responsibility to create policy and law. And so if they didn't violate what was there at the time, they didn't violate. And it's our job as a council, and it's the job of the mayor to lead, to make those rules better and more fair. That's what I've done on the council. So I was transparent with my views with regard to that particular case. And I'll note, quite frankly, in private, before the video was shown to everyone else, like almost every single council member, with the possible exception of 2, agreed on it. I said the same thing to every audience. When I was in front of a Black audience, I said what I said. When I was in front of a white audience, I said what I said. That's a real contrast to the mayor, who said that the police chief was wrong at Shiloh Baptist Church, but then when he got on the TV news, said it was overblown. That's really a difference of approach. But to be clear, look at my record on police issues, where I have fought for them. When there was a child who was stopped on the AY Greenway, it was very problematic. I fought for that change. Quite frankly, in a way that wasn't necessarily good politically, but I'm fine being wrong on the politics if I'm right by the community. And that's what I will continue to do as mayor. Be transparent, be honest, and work hard to get things done, and don't stop until the mission is accomplished.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me just say, you had the opportunity to watch the video on the AY Greenway to see what actually happened, and you declined that. The police chief said that you didn't want to see the video. So
that's
it's
not honest.
hard to say.
That's not honest. You have to do it.
Councilman Outling.
And he said he would have gotten that you were not interested in seeing the video. But, Mr. Foxworth, to get back to your point, watching that video of Marcus Smith, watching somebody in the last hours of their life is very somber. And when we sat there in that room and we looked at what could we do to stop that from happening again, Michelle Kennedy immediately said, we need to look at a co-response model. And there were a number of us that talked about the co-response model for a coming year. We finally had one brought before us from city staff. And Mr. Outling will say it had never been talked about in a work session. That is untrue. When she brought the co-response model, it passed 8-1. Guess who didn't vote for it? Now, it changed over time, and the co-response model we have right now is much better than the phase 1. But phase 2 wouldn't have happened without phase 1. We knew that when people are having a mental issue or an addiction issue, that's really not a policing issue. It needs healthcare. We have a lack of affordable healthcare in our community. And so by deploying mental health workers with police officers, our hope was something like Marcus Smith would not happen again.
Thank you. Moving on to our next question from the community.
Yes, I'm Dominique Davis. I am a citizen of the north side, east side of Greensboro. I am a former gang member, and I am an active hood humanitarian. I have a question for Mr. Outling. It's a two-part question and a statement. Now, to be a leader, you have to have a mind of a king or a queen, but the heart of a servant. My question for you is, why should I vote for you? And what could you do about police presence? Simple fact. It's been a lot of times I was going to commit crimes, but just seen police presence and stopped it. The macro level of the crime in our community, in our city, is because of the lack of police presence. Confidence is like cancer and it spreads. These young guys are confident because they don't see the police presence. And I know you have to make an executive decision, but this is a country of democracy and not dictatorship. So you can tell me an answer, but that answer was really not authentic. What could you do, or what could you push for better police presence in the city?
So the first part of your question about being a servant, that's what I am. I work exceptionally hard. Not just at going to the 5th banquet in a week and eating chicken with gravy on it. That's actually doing the hard work, reading the materials, talking with people about policy and how to affect structural change to make our community more safe, fair, and prosperous. That includes outside of election years. So when others in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a racial awakening for many in our community, like the mayor, goes on vacation, and not only goes on vacation, but broadcasts it on Facebook with emojis, with a Mai Tai sign.
I'm not talking about her, I'm talking about what you can do.
And it goes to where I was at. It was like I was actually here in community working on those issues, including with businesses who were devastated during that period. In terms of police presence, it's to the points that I've discussed previously. The police need more resources so that they can be more proactive and more present. That's just based on the actual data reflected through the response times. And so it's providing leadership like I did 2 springs ago in terms of increasing police pay so that there can be more officers here, backfilling our 100+ vacancy in the Greensboro Police Department so that they can be more proactive and actually be in community policing. It's the same thing that I would do, and I've advocated for in connection with the most recent budget, saying it doesn't go nearly far enough, especially since all of us are going to be paying the highest tax increase that we have in the city's history. And so those are good examples of servant leadership, being present and doing the hard work, even beyond simply walking somewhere or eating a chicken with gravy. And then also taking concrete action to actually get more police officers in our community so that they can proactively police while being fair, recognizing that those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Thank you.
I would like to answer that question also.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to say thank you for telling your story. That is very powerful. And I'm sure that you can mentor young men on what the pitfalls are and why they need to look at these youth jobs and other things. When you talk about being a servant, I dedicate 100% of my time to being the mayor of Greensboro.
And you do.
Mayor is considered a part-time job, but I'll tell you, this is my only job. I am not a servant to a big law firm. I make sure that I can vote on every issue, and I don't eat rubber chicken 5 days a week. I am out in the community.
And you are.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate that recognition. It is important for people to say, oh, I am a servant, I do this, I can read. Well, you actually have to be a servant. I put the city of Greensboro ahead of my professional development. I went inactive on a real estate license because I knew that we were at a time in our community that we were really at a crossroads, whether it was the tornado, civil unrest, the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic. Those were all things that I led in. This is a 24/7 job, 365 a week. It is not sitting in a law firm somewhere saying, okay, now I can be mayor. You talk about having your Java with Justin over at that Dolce Aroma. You made people come to you. I go to people. I go where people want to be. So I think that is an extreme difference. To say you are a servant or to actually be a servant is the difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the folks who put this on. My name is Lewis Pitts. Just to be candid, I didn't vote for either of you during the primary in May. And one of the reasons is my pretty solid involvement in police accountability issues before Justin was on the council and ever since he's been on the council. The Scales brothers, Jose Charles, the list could go on and on and on. And I know that back around 2016, when the body-worn cameras were subject to being released based on a city ordinance, not a state law, the people came together and created something called the People's Ordinance, which started with a presumption that body-worn camera footage got released. If anybody didn't want something shown, they had to prove it, the reverse. You two came up with something called the Outling Vaughan proposal, which totally mimicked, I've got the newspaper articles and I was following it, the Republican passed Faircloth bill that is the horrible predecessor to the one we've got now. And Justin went around bragging about what a progressive, trend-setting, body-worn camera access ordinance he was supporting. My question, and I'm asking this to anybody that I get to vote for, is there a problem or a pattern of racist policing, including racist violence, in our department, such that you will insist that the finalist in the run for the new chief of police, will be told of this problem and ask what he or she will do to redress it? So a little more simply, is there a problem with racist policing? And are you going to say that publicly, including so that the candidates for chief will get the opportunity to say whether they have the courage and the ideas to address it?
Thank you. Thank you. Outling, you want to answer that question? And Mayor Vaughan, you'll have the chance to answer.
So, Mr. Pitts, I'll tell you, the approach that I have taken in my life with good success is sometimes you can get in a whole lot of fights that serve as a barrier to getting things done. talking about whether or not something is racist as opposed to looking at the actual results and focusing on structural change. The results speak for themselves. When I first joined the council, we were in the New York Times about racial disparities in Scouts. I don't need to fight with someone about whether or not there's a racist intent behind it. The results speak for themselves and they have to be changed. That is part of the reason why I supported written consent, even when it wasn't politically expedient, even when the Police Officers Association was against it. Because quite frankly, it was a solution or a partial solution to a really bad race-related problem. As mayor, I'll provide that same principled leadership to accomplish more justice, more equity, and more fairness. That informed the approach that I took when I worked on creating what was the state's first policy to provide for the release of body-worn camera footage. When I joined the city council, every city in North Carolina, including Greensboro, said they could not release any police video because of existing state law. Every city said it, including Greensboro. But I used my legal training, worked with members of the community to figure out a path that, granted, was very narrow, but resulted in the release of body-worn camera. And when a Greensboro police officer assaulted a Black man on his mother's porch, we released the video. At the same time, Charlotte was not prepared. They were not proactive. They did not figure out a way to release body video under North Carolina law. They had an officer-involved shooting. They literally had protests and riots, which resulted in one person losing their life. And so it's not something that was a perfect solution, but some progress was better than no progress. It resulted in the release of body-worn camera then, and ultimately at the end of the day, we're seeing more body-worn camera video than we have ever seen. But I will note that in that policy that I largely authored, and I was the lead author on it, it was terrible.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
You got to finish because we talked over.
You'll get a chance. You'll get a chance. You'll get a chance. You'll get a chance.
I'll talk with you afterwards.
Thank you.
My apologies for not being as efficient in my response.
Thank you.
So Louis, you and I spent about 18 months together on the city community working group. And while we were talking about the Scales Brothers and other things, I had actually brought up the fact that we need to do something about body-worn camera. But at that point, there was the thought on the group to look more at a police review board than body-worn camera. When you brought your camera policy for us, the people's, I had a real concern about it, and I mentioned it a number of times, the fact that anybody could ask for any video. So that means if there is an issue at your house, I called it the nosy neighbor syndrome, that somebody would be able to say, I want to see why the police came to Lewis's house. And that meant that, according to yours, that it could be released. I felt that it should be that they have to say why it should be released instead of the home owner has to say, please don't release it. You know, we're seeing people in their worst moments. So I think you and I agreed a lot on body-worn camera, except for what triggers it. Is it the individual, or can the individual say no? I think there is systemic racism in everything that happens. You look at it around our city, we see it. In everything that we talked about today, it's reflected in, whether it's schooling, or healthcare, or all of the major topics, we see it. So I think as a city, I know I have made it my commitment to try to do away with that. I see how degrading systemic racism is. What we actually did with the money that we got from the JAG grant was that we made sure that all of the police department went through REI training. I'll respect the timer.
Thank you.
No answer by either one to my question.
Okay.
Well, I said, I think.
No.
I think there's
Wait,
systemic
Mayor
racism.
Vaughn, you're gonna get a chance, I promise.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have 2 more questions from the audience, the community, and then you both will have 3 minutes to speak, rebut, sell, whatever you want to do. I promise, okay? All right, our next question.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm also 6'4". So my question is for either of you. Over the past few years with COVID and the entire world blowing up, we've seen that the United States, the cities, the states, has not only the ability, but also the willingness under certain circumstances to provide for the people at the lowest portions of our socioeconomic system. We saw sweeping reforms. We saw direct payments going to families who were at risk of eviction or who lost their jobs. We saw so much going to help a class that had long since existed, but was changing to include the middle class and frankly, white people. And so we provided for them. I'm wondering now that COVID's over, almost over, now that we move forward and we've found a better place to survive, how far are you willing to extend those protections? How far are you willing to protect the lowest economic states?
Sure. Great question. My perspective on it is a little bit different. We, in my view, respectfully, don't provide for those people. When the city council has a budget and it gives money to organizations, that's their money. It's the community's money. It's not coming out of my individual pocket. And so it's really a matter of being effective in doing things with the power and influence of government that betters the entirety of our community, but lifts up those who are struggling the most economically. And I will continue and focus even more on helping to provide supports and opportunities with the resources that the community provides for its betterment, not providing it to community, but really supporting, creating the opportunities within it. That includes doing things like I'm currently doing on the city council right now. As I mentioned, all of us are going to experience the largest tax increase in the city's history. That affects every single person, whether you're a renter, whether you own a home, whether you're houseless, that affects it. And it's at a time in which we're going to be likely in an economic recession, inflation is out of control, and wages have been largely flat. And so I've been working with others on the city council to make sure that low-income persons don't pay any more in city taxes. Something that, again, it's not a matter of us providing to them, but it's us using government in a way that supports greater opportunity and is more fundamentally fair.
Thank you. I appreciate your question. We really were fortunate that we got an awful lot of federal funding to help us through. We are having a housing blitz right now, which will finish up the ERAP, the emergency rental and utility assistance. All of those claims should be paid within the next 6 weeks. I know people waited a long time. I believe that we need to have a robust eviction diversion program. We have some of that in this past budget. It is also in the affordable housing bond. The best way we can do to keep somebody housed is to make sure that they don't get evicted, that we can help them with their utilities. So while we don't do a lot of things, the affordable housing bond certainly gives us the tools to do a lot of things, whether it's to work with eviction diversion, to help people have their first time home buyers assistance, for us to work with builders, nonprofit builders, for rent subsidies. Hopefully one thing that we're working on, and yes, sometimes you have to work things. I'm not a dictator. I can't say this is going to happen, but working with our multifamily builders to put a few units aside in every building that we can subsidize that through our affordable housing bond. I think it's very important. When you get out and vote on the 26th, please make sure you vote for the bonds. They're all very important. And that is what's going to help us focus. The affordable housing bond, when you look at our 10-year housing study, it focuses on people in the 30 to 60% AMI. Those are the working poor, people who go out and they work 40 hours a week and then some, spending time away from their families, incurring transportation costs and childcare costs, We need to find a way to make sure that they can be in decent housing.
Thank you. Our last question from the floor.
Thank you all for your responses. Just want to say, Mayor Vaughan, that response to the body cam proposal that Mr. Lewis shared, that was not adequate at all. However, Mr. Allen, I cannot allow you today to reinvent yourself here in front of this crowd. If you talk to communities of color in this community, many of them will say that you have been the biggest opponent to policing accountability, whether it's been Jose Charles, the Scale brothers, whether it has been Marcus Dion Smith, the list goes on and on and on. The same with MWB or any type of progression that has tried to happen within this community. You were actually one of the first to be an opponent to kill violence, and now today you're almost as if you are Malcolm X in terms of talking about
your question?
kill violence. So the question is, and thank you so much, dear Lord. The question is, it's election season, and since everybody is being heroic, the candidates are being heroic during this time, I think that it would be in our best interest. Would you consider, both of you consider bringing back to the community and leading around 8 Can't Wait, providing a policy for us before the July 26th at the next council meeting, putting it on the agenda, making sure that the people get to see one last time where you all stand on that issue?
To be clear, absolutely yes. I've been saying it for months. I said it this past Sunday. Absolutely yes. Those are reforms that need to happen and the city council must vote on. Even if we assumed that the police adopted the policies, which they did not. And I encourage you to actually take the 15 minutes and read the policies. They did not adopt them. If it's a police adopted policy, they can change it whenever they want for whatever reason they want without any notice. So it's really important that the city council actually vote on those things. With the kind of lead up statement to your question, I respectfully disagree. And my record is very, very, very clear. Whether it's on proactively adopting a policy to prohibit racial and other profiling when other communities were not doing it, and well before many people started paying attention to the issue after the horrific murder of George Floyd, whether it's in connection with the officer who assaulted and battered Vaughan, in which I led the council in taking the unprecedented action of going after the credentials of that officer so that he could never be employed by any police department in the city, or in the state rather, of North Carolina. Or it's really fighting hard in a situation in which a young Black boy was stopped on the Greenway, where quite frankly, if he were white, he would not have been stopped. And going to bat for that issue. And I will tell you, respectfully, those who pay close attention to those issues know exactly where I sit. And as I've shared with some in private and a few people in public, the Police Officers Association knows where I stand. And they supported me before some of these things that I fought on, and then after they didn't support me because they didn't like that I was fighting for accountability. And they knew that I would not be a rubber stamp for anyone. And so respectfully, I encourage you and others to go to voteoutling.com, look at the accomplishments tags where you can look at the citations. And I will tell you right now, as I've said for many months unequivocally, the council should vote on 8 Can't Wait. I would vote in support of each of the proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you, CJ. I appreciate the question. Our next council meeting, I think, is July 19th. And, you know, at any time, it could have been put on the agenda. If Mr. Outling agrees, I'll agree. I'm happy to put them on the agenda because I did the work to make sure that our police department was conforming to what the spirit of the 8 Can't Wait is. So we've already got it done. So I'll be happy to bring that forward. I do want to say it is interesting that Mr. Outling talks about all the things that he's done. I've done this, I've done that, I've done that. But on the other hand, I can't do anything because I'm not mayor. You know, you can't have it both ways. You are either out there doing things or you can do nothing because you're not mayor. So, you know, there are lots of council members on the city council who have made significant changes And it's because they know how to bring it to the forefront. So I'll be happy to follow up on that for our next meeting. And I'd also like to talk to you about the body worn camera, because that again gets pretty wonky. And can I make one clarification? Faircloth, we didn't follow what Faircloth actually put through a very different bill. He put through a very different bill, and then it was actually Representative Brawley who absolutely gutted it. And then what happened in the last the omnibus bill has gutted it even more, has made it harder. And most, our police chief, our former police chief, the Greensboro Police Officers Association, the Police Benevolent Association, they all want the videos out quicker.
All right. Thank you all for your very, very thoughtful questions to both of these candidates. At this time, as promised, I'm going to give each of you 3 minutes to express whatever it is you want to express. You can answer questions that you might not have answered from these community members who, you know, we're still feeling like they didn't get a direct answer. You can use this opportunity to do that. I would suggest that you just consider the hurt and the anger of your citizens, and giving your last pitch to them and telling them why they should support you and how you're going to support them and this community. Okay. All right, Mayor Vaughan, you got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel like I need to rebut an awful lot of things that were said because I tried to respect the questions and the timer. I do understand mass transit. Mr. Outling talks about having ridden the bus when he was at UNCG. I don't really talk a lot about my personal story, and it would take more than 3 minutes, but I'd be happy to sit down and talk to a lot of you about it. But when I lived in Connecticut, I took mass transit all the time, and I went through 3 different cities. I did that 8 months pregnant. I know what it's like to stand out in the rain, in the very Connecticut cold. I know what it's like to take mass transit. So I'd be happy to tell you all my story at some point. But I think that you all know me pretty well. I was very pleased at the primary results. When you look at that map, it was the most support any candidate has ever had citywide. Out of 110 precincts, I think I got 80 or 85. The ones I didn't get primarily were in the, as Mr. Outling would say, the donut hole, District 3. His district, which I would assume since he had been their district representative for many years. The city of Greensboro is my heart. This is where I chose to live. This is where my children are, my grandchildren. I want my daughter to come back and live here. I want us all to prosper. There's an old saying that a mother can only be as happy as its saddest child. And that's the way I feel about this city, that we can only be as strong as our weaker neighborhoods. And by that, I mean the neighborhoods who are struggling with issues like crime and healthcare and education. It goes back to that groundwater discussion. And with me, this is my 100% focus. I know that you can't be a part-time mayor, that you as individuals deserve somebody who is going to give you 100% of their efforts. And that's what you get with me. Being mayor, you can't just meet people across the street at a coffee shop or at night. You have got to be available 7 days a week. I can't tell you the number of meetings that come up spur of the moment. I can't tell you that we can't schedule a crisis. When a crisis happens, you've got to be ready to mobilize. Thank you, and I hope I can count on your vote on July 26th.
Thank you, Councilman Outling.
Thank you to Jean. Thank you to the organizers. This has been really wonderful. And thank you to each of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. And in advance, thank you for hopefully voting during early voting starting on July 7th or Election Day on July 26th. I love this community with everything in my heart. And yes, I'm like many of you, I'm not privileged enough not to work because my kids need food. They need shelter. So it means that I have to work a job that helps provide for them. But my time, my heart, my works, as evidenced by my record, is always fighting for the city of Greensboro. That's fighting to have more economic opportunity throughout our community. That's the things that I have done. It's also the vision that I have to move our community forward, doing things like having a jobs guarantee for at-risk youth. Quite frankly, doing what other world-class cities like Washington, D.C. has done for decades and what our peers are doing now in Winston-Salem. It means creating a transportation system here that works for our community here. Because while I've traveled elsewhere and I've been to New York and seen their transportation systems, that doesn't change the fact that ours is failing and it doesn't meet the needs of our city now. And hopefully with growth, our existing status quo system will meet the needs of the future. It includes actually doing the hard work of prioritizing and tackling the root causes of crime. No more handouts, at least facilitated by the mayor's office, because the mayor is not a dictator, but it sets the tone. And when you're the presiding officer of an organization, you can help drive outcomes to privileged insiders like Bourbon or Cadillac Service Garage, or for, again, organizations that are well-connected, although they do great work, but you don't see $5,000 going to repair your windows. I know that we can do better, and I know that all of you believe we can do better, including as evidenced by the primary election, where our community knows Nancy Vaughn. She's represented all of our community for nearly a decade and more, and most of them voted for change. And I am that change on the ballot. I encourage you to learn more about my history, learn more about a shared vision that we can build together, not just what we're doing today, what we can do tomorrow, at voteoutling.com. And again, I appreciate Jean and others for organizing this terrific event. And if you have any questions, thoughts, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
I just want to take this time to thank you both for coming. Thank you both for facing these questions and facing your community head on. You know, people are voting real soon. So I just appreciate y'all taking the time to come and work through this process with us. And I hope that everyone found it fruitful and we're moving forward. All right, thank y'all so much. Okay, I guess I'm gonna turn it back over to CJ to dismiss us in his very own special way. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Y'all, please give a round of applause for Brother David, who is my right-hand man. Great job keeping the time, and I really, really appreciate you. Thank you.
Let the church say amen. Let's give the candidates another round of applause. Got to dispel some myths with Justin. If it had got it out that I didn't like Justin, that's a lie. Justin and I really like each other. We just don't agree on a lot. So hopefully we get some beer or something when we close out of here one day. But anyway, thank you all once again for coming. I think what we set out to do has been achieved. I think you all are going to leave better. This is what we say in church. You're going to leave better than how you came. You have gotten a intro into some political education and what is happening within our community, and it helps you to be more informed about the choices you're going to make at the ballot box. July the 26th. If you have any questions that you need to ask the candidates after we close out, please feel free to come up and talk to them. But just continue to support all of the work that community leaders are doing to continue to grow this community, to build this community, to strengthen our community, to get the changes that we want to see happen within this community. So once again, thank you all for coming out. God bless you.